Hi, good evening. I'm Michael Drillinger, chairman of the 10 Mile River Scout Museum. And because COVID has kept the museum closed this summer, we've been presenting this series of virtual talks. Thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you'll enjoy it. The 10 Mile River Scout Camp, the 10 Mile River Scout Museum is located on the 10 Mile River Scout Camp Reservation, which is a 12,000 acre reservation in Sullivan County in the town of Narrowsburg. The reservation was created by a group of prominent New Yorkers back in the late 1920s, led by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The first camps opened at 10 Mile River in 1927. The TMR Scout Museum was started in 1997 and is dedicated to preserving the history and artifacts of the 10 Mile River Scout camps and our local area. As I mentioned, the museum is closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but you can take a virtual tour of the museum if you go to our website, tmrmuseum.org/historian. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to call the museum at the number on the screen. We're using as a platform for these webinars the tool GoToWebinar. And somewhere on your screen, you're going to see a box that looks something like this. And somewhere on that box will be an area for questions. So if you have a question for the presenter sometime during the presentation, we encourage you to type your question here. And at the end of the presentation, we'll get to as many questions as we can. At the very end of our program this evening, there will be a brief survey. And if you would, we'd appreciate it if you'd stick around and take a moment to fill out the survey. A video of this whole program will be available on the museum's YouTube channel in about 3 days. There are several ways that you can interact with the 10 Mile River Scout Museum on social media. There's our website that I mentioned. We also have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. And as I said before, we have a YouTube channel where you can look for the virtual tour of the museum. As I said before, if you have any questions, you can call the museum or email questions@tmrmuseum.org. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is chairman@tmrmuseum.org. We offer these programs free to the general public, but there is some cost in presenting them. And if you feel so motivated to support programs like this, we'd love it if you would go to tmrmuseum.org/donate and make a contribution to future programs. This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing Emily Carrollo, who is a wildlife technician for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Emily did her undergraduate work at the University of Virginia, and she received her master's in wildlife and fisheries science from Penn State. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Emily Carrollo.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate being able to be here and present to the 10 Mile River Scout Camp and Museum. It really means a lot to reach out to our people in the community and in our region, and especially in regards to black bears and wildlife in general. I think there's always a lot to learn and be able to pick up and how to live better with wildlife. So it's a message we try to communicate often. So let me just get my PowerPoint started for you guys. So I'm here today, kind of as Mike was explaining, to present about black bears of the Hudson Valley and Catskills. And to give a little bit more about myself, as Mike said, I'm currently a wildlife technician for the black bear program in our region. And I did my undergrad at the University of Virginia, my master's at Penn State, and I've been in about the wildlife field for probably around 5 years now. I've done quite a bit of work around the country, but some of my favorite and some of my most experienced work is working with black bears, not only here in New York, but also in Pennsylvania. So I normally ask sometimes about black bear stories and our favorite black bear stories, and this is one of my favorite stories. It's actually one of the first dens that I was ever able to go out on. There's quite a bit of research with GPS and VHF collared sows to learn about cub survival and dispersal, and collect a whole bunch of biological data that is important to managing not only black bears, but biological data to collect in wildlife management in general. So we'll play this quick video. I hope everyone can hear it. I actually really enjoy this video because there are so many sounds that bears make that I think are missed, as they're not frequently heard around people. The kind of nuzzling or almost dolphin-ish sound that you hear in this video are actually the cubs nursing, and that's part of their communication system with their sow, with their mom. This is another video. I'm going to wait to play for a second. I want you to really listen to the sounds that the female actually makes with their cubs. This was a collared female in New York, or one of our collared females in New York. They are just starting to emerge from the den, so their cubs look like they're a little cold, but don't worry, mom makes sure they're okay and stay nice and warm and comfortable. And they'll kind of go in and out of the den over the course of this first start of spring to kind of get their paws underneath them and make sure that they're mobile and ready to move. As you can see, it's kind of a really nice throaty kind of sound that she makes to communicate with her cubs. And I love highlighting these stories because, again, the uniqueness of those sounds is a little different. It gives kind of a different story behind black bears, and why it's important to conserve them for not only viewing purposes and everything, but culturally as well. So we'll start a little bit with black bear biology. Adults can be pretty big. They can weigh anywhere from 150 to 660, even 700 pounds. Some record holders that were harvested not only in the state of New York, but the state of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, were well over 700 pounds. But that is definitely on the larger side. So I'd say on average, most black bears, male black bears, land right around 300 pounds. Adult females can weigh anywhere from 100 to 230 pounds. On average, they weigh about 175 to 180. Bears will land anywhere from about 2.5 to 3 feet tall at the shoulder. For some of those really big males, it could be a little bit taller, but I'd say typically black bears, once they hit a certain size, they start to expand in a little bit in the width category instead of the height category, as I'm sure some people can appreciate for sure. So at birth, cubs weigh about 225 to 300 grams, or 17 to 11 ounces. To give an idea of a more physical form of what this kind of looks like, imagine like a cell phone and a half, or 2 cell phones in your hand. Black bears are actually born, just like most bear species, are born incredibly small. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're typically born in a den setting where they're very immobile and very helpless for a number of days before they start to wander around and get big enough to be able to follow mom. Their average lifespan is 20 to 25 years, but I believe the oldest bear was actually recorded, I think it was somewhere up in Minnesota, and she was almost 40 years old when she died of natural causes. Their home ranges for females are a little bit smaller, which is true for most wildlife species. It's 10 to 20 square miles. And for males, it's anywhere from 10 to 100 square miles. A lot of the size of a home range has to depend on the resources that they can find. So if they only need a small home range to be able to find all the resources they need, food, water, shelter, and mates as well, then they won't travel very far. But if those resources become a little bit more sporadic and a little bit more sparse, they'll increase those home ranges to make or increase their ability to find resources. A little bit of black bear family life. Cubs are born in mid-January to mid-February. Like I said, they're born blind, deaf, very small, and very helpless. But as they grow, and they grow very quickly, they stay with mom for about 1.5 years. And as I stated, these cubs, to come around 3 months old, 4 months old, are very capable of keeping up with mom and roaming that home range and finding food resources and learning how to interact with the environment. Unfortunately, the boar or the papa bear doesn't really do much to help raise the cubs. And so males, when they actually encounter females with cubs, if they can get a hold of a cub, they may actually harm it to try and increase its chances to breed with a female. Fortunately, females are really aware of their surroundings, and cubs are incredible climbers. So that's one of their first defenses, is to climb the nearest tree and be able to get away from any harm that may come from not only other bears, but other wildlife species as well. Cubs are independent at roughly about 7 months old, so they don't necessarily need to be with their mom for the full year and a half, but that's their typical lifetime stage, is that they're with their mom, learning those lifetime skills for about a year and a half. But at about 7 months old, they are perfectly capable of being on their own. Their mom has taught them plenty of survival skills. They're totally weaned at that point, and they're about 25 to 30 pounds typically in July, so right around the size of a small dog. There is a lot of opportunity to see black bears in New York and other areas that they inhabit that doesn't include actually seeing a black bear. And I think this is one of my favorite activities to do when I'm out and I'm wandering, either hiking or just walking through the woods, is to look for wildlife signs. So some of the common signs that you'll see of black bears are their tracks and scat, I'd say, are most commonly forms that they are normally seen outside of actually physically seeing a bear. Trees where they climb, as black bears are incredibly good climbers, especially if it's a well-documented black bear area. So for example, around Narrowsburg and Sullivan County, you'll often see trees that have scratch marks or small marks on the side that are indicated or would indicate that a bear has climbed that tree. This is more examples of tracks in the snow. Snow in the winter time is a really great time to see evidence of wildlife, as snow provides the perfect opportunity to leave a print. Some other more unique signs of black bears in the wild would be some of these nests that are kind of almost causing the tree, and it's not because the bear is staying up there and sleeping in these nests, or almost, I call them nests, but they're not quite nests, they're not built intentionally. It's actually because bears will climb up, especially nut trees or fruit-bearing trees, and they'll actually be sitting in these branches and cause kind of these conglomerates or bunches of leaves to form as they're just sitting there and eating food. And then obviously they'll come back down and meander on to the next food resource. And another common, especially in wooded areas, sign of black bears would be scratch marks at their shoulder height when they're standing. So black bears will actually, for some reason, they love telephone poles, but any kind of nice straight wooden structure that they can get their claws on or they can get their teeth on. They'll do a lot of scratching and biting at these poles, and this helps leave their scent behind, almost as kind of a marking system. Bears, black bears in particular, are territorial, but they're not incredibly territorial where they actively go around like some species and try and enforce almost a boundary. But they will, especially males, they will kick out smaller males from their home ranges, and that includes females as well. So obviously, black bears and bears in general, I think, are one of the best examples of animals that hibernate throughout the winter. But what I think is one of the most interesting facts that people find out about black bears is they're not true hibernators, in the sense that they are very aware of their surroundings during the winter. So they do go into a much slowed and slowed down period where their body actually does slow down a lot of their metabolism. Their heart rate slows down, but they are still very aware and very capable of getting up and walking away or going. And if, say, it's a particularly nice day out, especially if it's a male, they might actually go out and venture around, see what's going on, and then come back to their den and go back to sleep. It's kind of almost like half awake, half asleep kind of nap. So they're very, sedated. They're very calm. They don't move around a lot, especially females with cubs. They don't really ever tend to leave the den because they don't want to leave their cubs vulnerable, especially during that stage of their life. But for bears that are more mobile and younger bears that may not have cubs or males, they will get up and venture around their site or their den area. So when bears actually go down to hibernate and when they wake up really depends on their age and their sex. Males tend to go into this hibernation or this kind of torpid state a little bit later than females do. Females with cubs tend to go down a little bit earlier. For example, cubs from the year before. So this will be when they're denning with their mom the second time around. They tend to go in a little bit earlier, and so do females that are pregnant and will be having cubs that winter. But some, younger bears that are on their own, either females that aren't pregnant or do not have cubs, or males, they tend to go in a denning period a little bit later. So the opposite is true for when bears start to wake up and when they start to become more active in the spring. Males and younger bears without cubs will actually come out of hibernation a little bit earlier. So say even as early as beginning of March, depending on the weather. But typically by mid-March, you see a lot of those males and younger bears starting to come out of hibernation. Females with cubs don't tend to come out of hibernation until early April, even mid-April in some circumstances. So a black bear diet, their natural diet is really quite omnivorous. They will consume anything that they can really get their hands on. This includes berries, seeds, nuts, insects. If they do find carrion, and carrion is dead animals or deceased animals, they will occasionally consume that as well. A lot of wild greens, especially early in the spring when things like skunk cabbage are coming out. They will definitely consume a lot of those kinds of wild greens, and occasionally they will go after live prey. But with that being said, black bears are really lazy. So their main part of their diet consists of food resources that they can find really just meandering around their home range or their territory, like berries, seeds, nuts, and a lot of it is very seasonal. So as I said, early on in the spring, a lot of vegetation is included in that, skunk cabbage, sprouts that start to come up, early ferns. And then as the summer goes on and we start to see our blueberry crop, our raspberry crop, berries become a very important part of their diet midsummer. And insects are pretty consistent throughout. So a lot of larvae, that's why in a lot of bear territories, you'll see dead logs that are ripped up. You'll see rocks flipped over, and those are bears trying to search for any kind of insects or larvae that are in those areas. As we come into fall, we obviously see, just like a lot of other wildlife species, a dependency on a lot of nuts. So whether it be beech nuts, acorns, any kind of nut that they can find. And as I was stating, live prey is occasional because they really want the easy meal. So if they have to put in a lot of effort, for example, chasing after a deer or something like that, it's just not really typical of black bear behavior because they really don't want to put in that large amount of effort. They're trying to consume as many calories in one sitting with little effort. So with that being said, human resources can become a huge part of their diet as well, especially in human-dominated landscapes that black bears may find themselves roaming around. Garbage, birdseed, pet food are all really big reasons why bears will start to interact more with human landscapes because of these available resources that provide a very high caloric intake in a short amount of time. So as we get started kind of in the talk, not only about biology, but I wanted to include some talk about conflict as well, because managing black bears also means managing often for the conflict that is created between human and black bears in the landscapes that aren't as forested anymore. So to give you a little bit of an idea of where our region is located, our region 3 is this center picture down here. We're located out of New Paltz, but we manage 7 counties, which also includes Sullivan County and that Narrowsburg area. But the Hudson Valley, and as many know, in the Catskill region in general, extends quite a bit beyond these county lines and is a large region that we manage for bears. And in that region, we have about 2.2 million people. And there are a lot of different landscape types. So for example, This is kind of just a little Google Maps screenshot of the satellite imagery that they have. We have quite a few cityscapes. So this is the city of Kingston, but there are many other cities that you can find all along, especially the Hudson River, where black bears are found just on the outskirts. This Bluestone Wild Forest, for example, has quite a few black bears just right on the outskirts of the city of Kingston. We also have quite a bit of agriculture. It's not as prevalent as some other parts of New York State, but there are quite a few agricultural tracts that you can find in various counties. So specifically, mostly Orange County is a big one, but Dutchess as well. And obviously, we have our large swaths of forested and natural habitat. And this is where we find the majority of black bears, but that is not to say that we don't see them close to other human landscapes. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we do have plenty of black bears in our region as well. So across the state, there are about 6,000 to 8,000 black bears. About 30 to 35% of them inhabit the Catskill region, and there's another portion as well that exists kind of in the eastern part of our region in the Taconic and Hudson Highlands area. They are very established throughout the Hudson Valley and obviously throughout the Catskills. This gives us kind of an overall look of the numbers across time and also kind of throughout the different regions that we categorize black bears. That we now have essentially a northern zone and a southern zone. We used to categorize the bears a little bit actually into 3 different zones that were the Adirondacks, Catskills, and the Allegheny region. But now the Catskills and Allegheny region have a pretty cohesive unit of black bears. So we're considered the southern zone and the Adirondacks are considered the northern zone. The Adirondacks hold the majority of black bears in the state, but the Catskills and the southern region are picking up quite greatly and quite significantly. So as you can see, and this is kind of how black bears have expanded across New York State. Earlier in the 1950s, even, and earlier in the 1900s, black bear numbers were significantly low. And a lot of this has to do with the history behind wildlife management, which is very interesting, so I won't get too far into it. But very long story short, a lot of large mammals were extirpated from many areas of the Northeast and the Eastern regions. So black bears were part of that. So here in New York, we had very small populations that remained and were able to survive through that extirpation in the early, when settlers really essentially arrived here through the early 1900s and mid 1900s. And from there, so there was a northern population in Adirondacks and a very small remnant population in the Catskills. And really that's where our current black bear population expanded from. So these are our current, again, current black bear populations. This gives an idea of the primary habitat, so habitat that black bears prefer and are typically found in throughout the state of New York, and also the secondary habitat. This is what secondary really means, is that black bears will be found here. They will definitely move throughout these areas, but they aren't as common or as frequently sighted because it's just not preferred habitat for black bears. I'd like to point out kind of this lighter area through here. A lot of the reason why there aren't a ton of black bears in the middle of the state is because there's a lot of agriculture. And while that can arguably be a food resource for bears, that also means that the forest landscapes that black bears depend on aren't as frequent either. So it's not really, again, that preferred habitat that black bears like to be in. This gives a little bit of an idea of some of the population objectives that we have in our black bear management plan. As you can see, the Catskill region does have quite a few bears, and actually what we're trying to do, because of not only population numbers and carrying capacities, but also because of conflict numbers and what we experience in our region, we're trying to reduce the black bear population in quite a few of our wildlife management units. So to get more specifically into black bear conflict, here in New York, we do use a category system to categorize our bears into different levels of conflict, because obviously there's varying levels of concern that we hold behind the types of black bear conflict that can occur. So we have 4 levels. The first being a category 4 bear. And what that essentially means is that someone calls us up and says, hey, I saw a bear in my backyard, it walked through, it left, I haven't seen it again. So sightings, essentially, it's an observation. A category 4 bear is an observation or sighting of a black bear. Level 3 means that essentially the bear did get into trouble, but it hasn't been that frequent, it hasn't been consistent, and it was pretty minor. So getting into a bird feeder, maybe knocking over a trash can, and the bear kind of find a goodie, meandered away, and then never really came back. That would be considered something that's pretty minor and definitely by no means out of the ordinary. And especially when the behavior is consistent, and people at this point is when people have the most ability to decrease that bear coming back by implementing measures of either reducing or removing entirely the resource, or providing a way that actually protects the resource and prevents it from being accessible to a black bear. Level 2 is when we start to get a little concerned, so it might potentially be a hazard or a danger for people. So the behaviors become consistent. They might be showing some signs of a lack of fear or a lack of weariness around people, so they might become incredibly comfortable. Bears typically in this category still very much so have the ability to be pushed and removed from the area, as far as removing resources and then enforcing a little bit of harassment of black bears encourages bears, even in this category 2 level, to be able to move on and kind of keep themselves out of trouble. And last but not least is a category 1 bear or a level 1 bear, and that's when they actually become really a physical threat to people, and when we start to become concerned, and even a physical threat to livestock as well. So for example, bears that might have gone in, and we've had reports of bears killing goats, or we've had reports of bears killing donkeys, and that's when we start to get a little bit more concerned, as they're showing behavior that isn't unusual for bears, or isn't something that we are unlikely to see, but isn't typical either. And it's where we start to have a little bit more of physical presence as far as the DEC, representation goes. And this also includes bears that break into homes or might be physically aggressive towards people. But these category 1 bears are far and few between. And what I always tell people is that no bear starts out as a category 1 bear. They always start out with much smaller behaviors, and it's why it's so important to, as soon as you notice there's a problem, do something about it. So, making sure that garbage is secure and not having bird feeders up during the summer are all really important, especially when you know that there's a problem, to prevent a bear from possibly developing worse behavior. So to give an idea of how many complaints we deal with in the region, and also kind of a sign of how black bear populations have grown, and also honestly, human numbers have grown in this region as well, is we can see a very clear indication of conflict increasing throughout the region. Now on average in our region, we deal with about 400 complaints, roughly almost every year. And so this year in particular was also pretty high, and a lot of that had to do with potentially it being a little dry this summer, and some natural food resources not being as available to black bears as they normally are. And studies have shown that once black bears don't have a natural food resource, if they do have unnatural food resources to try and move to, that conflict behavior can increase. So this is also kind of an example of some of the class 1 and class 2 complaints that we deal with. There is a lot of variation, as I was saying. A lot of it has to do with what kind of natural food resources are available for black bears. So you see in years that may have been a bad crop year or natural crop year, that some behaviors or nuisance behaviors do increase. So this graph is a little bit messy, and I have a little bit of a clear one for the next slide, but this gives an idea of really roughly when we see the majority of black bear behavior and the majority of black bear nuisance behavior. So it really peaks in the month of June, and as you can see, it's pretty consistent throughout, whatever year it may be, no matter how few or great complaints we receive, it's always consistent with this kind of timeline. So to pull one out specifically, this was for 2019. You can really see that peak in June. It starts to taper off come the month of July, which June and July is when black bears are really on the move. And they are actually beginning of June. It's really a time where not only yearlings are being booted from mom, so mom can then breed, or the 1.5-year-olds are being booted from mom, but it's also breeding season. So males and females are on the move to breed. Young ones are on the move to disperse and find their own territories, find their own home ranges. And so there's a lot of black bear movement. That means that they can come across a lot of different resources that can potentially cause conflict with people in the area. But as you can see, around this time of year, we really start to taper off, and a lot of that has to do with, black bears are starting to really get into the end of summer resources and the fall resources, especially a lot of those nut crops like beech nuts and acorns. So we do have a bear response manual that kind of indicates how we handle a lot of black bear calls, but it also goes over kind of what we do when we get a call about a complaint. And to give you kind of a brief idea of what we do is we collect the details, we collect the complaint information. We have a statewide database that we enter these complaints into, so we can then keep track of complaints over time and understand how different regions are being affected. And we also identify the types of response that we need to have. So we have quite a few, like I said, conflict examples, and I like to point a few out that typically become a little bit more concerning. Here, especially in the Hudson Valley and other parts of New York, we do deal with quite a bit of black bear agricultural damage. In these situations, there are several different types of responses that we can have, but private landowners, and especially agricultural landowners that have black bears in the area, are always encouraged to actually allow, if they can do it safely, allow hunting on their property to try and help prevent black bears from really getting into these and reduce black bear numbers specifically on their property. Beehives are another really big one. The electric fences are genuinely one of the best ways to prevent conflict with not only beehives, but especially small livestock like chickens and ducks. I always joke with people that chickens are on the bottom of the totem pole for all wildlife species, so it's not uncommon to especially see black bears get into things like chickens. And by, like I said, they are tasty for everyone, including people. So using things like electric fences are always a really good idea. So some of the conflict examples that are become really more concerning are when bears get into a household and when bears start to go after slightly larger livestock. So for example, I'd like to point out that this was actually a miniature horse. It was attacked by a black bear, was witnessed, or it actually was caught by the farm owner, and he was actually able to shoot the bear and was able to save the horse. The horse survived. This is legal in the state of New York, where black bears are in the process of or in the action of harassing, worrying, or killing livestock, that landowners can protect their livestock against black bears. And that gives a lot of control, especially for people who own these kind of livestock, and gives them a little bit more control over these scenarios. And in the end, we know that black bear populations are very healthy here in New York, so that's why we like to try and give that safety precaution or ability for homeowners, because this can happen very occasionally. In these situations where bears break into houses, again, it becomes an extreme danger, especially to people, because if bears are confined to a small space and they can't get out of somewhere and encounter a person, they are way more likely to cause physical harm to a person. Black bears don't usually react to people, even if they come into close contact with people at an outdoor setting. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that black bears genuinely are more afraid of us than we are of them. And I know sometimes for how large and intimidating they can be, that's hard to believe, but they will do anything they possibly can to escape and remove themselves from a location rather than have a physical confrontation with a person. But with that being said, again, if they are confined to a small space, they are a lot more likely to try and defend themselves because they don't feel as though they can escape. So that's why home break-ins are such a serious concern for our management program. Another unique situation is when black bears get caught in urban situations. Sometimes they are able to find themselves or their ways out of an urban situation without encountering many people or having many problems. But in certain situations where we feel like the likelihood that they will encounter someone or potentially cause a situation, for example, in this location, they were right on a highway. We were very concerned that if the bear did try and cross, it might cause a vehicle collision. We decided to remove that bear. And the last one I'll give, because this actually has been a little bit more of a problem this year, are bears and pets. What we typically have when we get calls in regards to, especially dogs, because honestly, bears overall want absolutely nothing to do with dogs or cats. Again, they're not a meal ticket by any means because of the effort that they have to put in to even try and, take a dog or take a cat. But typically the calls we get are because a dog was either unleashed or was let out and unfortunately tried to confront the bear or tried to chase after the bear. And more often than not, the bear runs off and is perfectly fine. But if the bear gets stuck and the dog is confronting it, sometimes that results in the dog getting physically harmed by the bear because it needs to defend itself. So if you live in bear country, it's always a good idea to keep your dogs on leash, especially if you're out wandering wild spaces. If you're just letting your dogs out at night, you have a big yard, I totally understand. But it might be a good idea to just take a look, clap your hands a little bit before you let the dogs out so the bear is aware that you are coming outside and the dogs are coming outside. And that might encourage it to leave before the dogs can run out and chase it off. And lastly, and I always like to point this out, especially for the safety of dogs, is that electric fences are pretty good at keeping dogs in, but don't always keep them in, and they definitely don't keep wildlife out. So be aware that even though your dog might be safe from getting out, it doesn't mean that wildlife can't get in. So to avoid any kind of wildlife conflict, it's always a good idea to make sure that you're aware of what might be out there ahead of time and to try and have some sort of system to recall your dog back if that is the case. So we do have quite a few conflict management tools that helps us reduce the amount of conflict people are experiencing in a region. Specifically, hunting and outreach are some of our major components when it comes to conflict management tools, but we also use hazing by our department, not only by people in the public in general. But we also will harass bears and haze bears on site. But we also do research and a lot of multi-group cooperation to help decrease the amount of bear conflict. So specifically, we'll go in a little bit to hunting first. These graphs, and I go over them really quickly, but if you ever get a chance, are actually available in our black bear management plan. And they go over really why we see so much conflict in our region. And specifically, one of the best ones that I like to point out is the black bear and human density comparison here. So we have an identification of the black bear, range that we kind of pointed out earlier before, and then how dense human populations are. And as you can see, the majority of our region is incredibly dense when it comes to people. And so when you combine a dense black bear population and a dense human population, we have a lot more black bear conflict. So this gives an idea of some of our seasons and some of the black bear management hunting seasons that we have. This was from earlier when black bears were first kind of being hunted and or introduced as a huntable population here in New York. And then this goes a little bit further into now more of our current, and actually this has even changed from 2016, but our current maps and identification of areas and our management goals and hunting goals that we have for the various wildlife management units. We did earlier, or several years ago in 2014, we introduced an early season here in the southern zone, and that did help increase some of our bear take here in the hunting season. And what this really helps with, again, is it gets our bear population in our region to a level that's not only good for its biological carrying capacity, but also for its social carrying capacity. So how much conflict people can really deal with and how to avoid any kind of serious incidents that may occur in areas that have high black bear populations and high people populations. This is a really great, I like this diagram a lot because it really kind of goes along with how many complaints. You can see a pretty good pattern of how many complaints we get in a year in comparison to how high the harvest is. So for example, this looks like it's right around 2015, we had quite a few complaints and we also had a pretty high harvest. So bears that find themselves involved in nuisance activity or involved in more human-dominated landscapes tend to be more accessible to hunters, so that does increase their likelihood that they may be taken by a hunter. So as we see, the more complaints that we get and the more conflict that we see, we typically do see higher harvest numbers as well. The second, and really one of our most important tools when it comes to black bear conflict and to mitigating black bear conflict, is public outreach. So it is by and far one of our best conflict management tools. And this is the same for every single state and for every single agency. Reaching out to the public and helping them address their own nuisance bear problems via education is incredibly important. And a lot of this is because if we can help give people long-term answers and long-term goals about how to resolve black bear conflict, they're less likely to face it in the future. So that means that if we can get information out there, they can help spread the word to the other public citizens or other public people, their neighbors, whatever it may be, and that helps really prevent bears from getting in trouble in the first place. And what I always like to really identify is that we are the problem. It's not bears. They're just doing what they need to do to survive. And we undoubtedly, as a human species, have the ability to make decisions and take action to prevent problems in the first place. So I'm kind of going over a little bit of conflict resolution. You know, bears in general are pretty weary of humans, and they also, I'm sorry about that. I had to close the door. So bears in general are weary of people, and they really don't feel comfortable around people in general. But that does not mean that they won't eventually get used to living in a human-dominated landscape. So what this means is that bears can become a little comfortable about being around a human-dominated landscape, but it does not mean that they necessarily want to become involved or have a confrontation with a person. And we get a lot of calls like that, that people will say, oh my gosh, we have this bear, it's consistently walking through our yard, you know, we don't have anything up. And I always tell people, well, you know, the good thing is that as long as the bear is not finding any trouble, it doesn't have a reason to continuously be around your neighborhood. But if it's just meandering through the yard, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not afraid of you. It just might mean that it's understanding how it can meander through these human landscapes and not find trouble. And that's a good thing. And as long as we remove the attractant, we will always remove the bear or keep the bear out of the area. These are signs, and I put these pictures in here. These are exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to encourage a bear to feel like it's our friend across the fence, or we definitely don't want to feed black bears. This is only encouraging bad habits, and in the end, could easily result in the death of the bear if it becomes potentially aggressive or becomes potentially unafraid of and approaching people. So we always, you know, encourage people to help keep that weariness by harassing bears if they are starting to find trouble. And I always encourage people that even if they aren't necessarily finding trouble, it's a good idea to encourage that weariness and snap your pictures, but then go ahead and give the bear a yell or clap your hands or bang pots and pans. Another management techniques, we do harass bears. We do trap and harass bears in situations that we feel as though the bear can be encouraged to leave an area. These are in situations where we feel as though either the homeowner or the property owner has done everything they can to remove the attractant, but the bear is still pretty persistent about hanging around. And so in those situations, what we do is we'll trap the bear, we'll tag it for identification purposes, and then we'll also release it actually on site. We don't ever move bears, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that once a bear finds a resource, it's very unlikely to leave an area and not come back, even if we move it many miles away. So they actually will come back to areas that they're continuously finding resources or that is their home range. So what we do is we harass the bear on site, and we really go above and beyond. We use things like air horns. We actually shoot bears with rubber buckshot, which is just a painful stimulus, but it doesn't actually physically harm the bear. And we try and really encourage it to build a negative association with that location. But homeowners can do this on their own, especially if the bear activity or conflict activity is very mild, like it's just getting in the garbage, by getting their own air horns and harassing the bear, or using things like a critter getter or a motion sensor alarm that goes off and discourages the bear from getting into a resource. And in some states, not currently here in New York, they do have programs where they use dogs that are specific to bear harassment and bear tracking, and they use them to harass bears as well, and it really encourage that negative association with that location. So we do focus a lot on future research and management. Research is really one of the best ways to understand black bear behavior and biology, and how to create the best management plans that not only benefit people, but also benefit bears as a whole. So identifying things like fine spatial scale habitat use around urban and suburban centers, or how bears interact with recreational spaces and activities might be future research that not only the DEC, but other departments of the state and other nonprofits might be looking into eventually. But moving forward, what a lot of wildlife species are using and wildlife research is using is GPS data. And that really helps us understand how animals and wildlife use the landscape. And lastly, we also need to get other wildlife management stakeholders involved. So that means working together with various departments, whether it be state or it be private or it be university driven. Having these relationships encourages not only cohesive management, but also encourages research from many other different aspects. It might get us asking questions together that again can come together as a whole and create a more complete management guide and practice for black bears and other wildlife species. We also have an app called I See Mammals. It is an app that you can actually download from either Google Play or from the App Store, your Apple App Store, and you can actually record mammal sightings. This is something done through, I believe, I think it's Cornell has to help develop this app, and actually helps kind of keep track of New York species and where we're seeing them. We also have our black bear management plan and other additional black bear information available on our website at the DEC website. That's just dec.gov. And there's also a lot of other information out there on some websites. For example, bearwise.org, and is an incredibly great resource when it comes to black bear conflict and how to manage black bear conflict and how to avoid it in the first place. We also have in our local regional office, we have a general wildlife line that is manned 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. People are always willing or can feel free to give this number a call for any wildlife concerns or problems or questions. It's all the wildlife department staff that answer that line. So we're incredibly knowledgeable, and if that person on the line that day can't get you the answer right then and there, they'll find the person that can. So last but not least, what I always like to kind of end with is, in the end, when it comes down to not only black bear management, but wildlife management as a whole, it really is getting everybody to care enough to make the small changes that we have to make to live, with and among wildlife in general. Specifically with black bears, a lot of the steps that public people or public, holders and landholders and property owners and stakeholders can take to avoid conflict are typically really simple. It's just really getting people to take those steps and make the little effort to avoid that conflict. And not only will that help benefit black bears, it'll also help benefit wildlife as a whole. So with that, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time. I hope that this has helped bring up a lot of questions, but also answered a lot of questions as well. I have my contact information down here at the bottom, but I am also more than happy to pass this along to Michael to be able to pass along to anyone that might want to contact us, or especially that general wildlife line in the future.
Hi, thank you, Emily. This is Mitchell. I'm the vice chair of the museum, and thank you so much for this great presentation. We got a number of comments saying that you were so thorough and comprehensive, but of course there are a few questions, some things that you spoke about during the presentation, but people wanting a little bit more detail. And just as a side note, I just want to say that we do the survey at the end of the webinar, and a number of people from some of the prior webinars which featured nature talks asked for a presentation about bears. So this is really, really exciting. Okay, so what is the relationship between bear paw print size in inches and bear size in pounds?
To be honest with you, I don't think that actually there is a direct relationship between bear paw size and the size of the bear, like very directly. But obviously, you know, if there's a very large print, it is probably a very large bear. But one of the best ways that is a good indicator of bear weight, and actually what we will use to estimate bear weight for bears that we can't physically pick up and weigh. So when we have our weigh stick and say the bear is like 450 pounds, no matter how many strong dudes you get, sometimes we just can't lift it. You can actually use their girth size. So that's the circumference around their chest, kind of right behind their shoulders. And you can use that girth size. It actually is strongly correlated to their weight. But I don't think that there's much of a correlation between their paw size and weight, as far as I'm aware.
Great. What makes those few areas on the New York map not compatible for bears, black bears?
So there are a couple regions that we basically say are not, or parts of our region that we say at this point are not, you know, compatible for bears. But I think moving forward, there's going to be some redrawing of those maps and some discussion about what areas truly aren't incompatible for bears. So specifically, one of the areas that we work with a lot that has a very high black bear population is Rockland County, and that area in general. And Rockland County actually has a very large state parks in its county borders and in those wildlife management units that hold a lot of black bears, and it's actually really good black bear habitat. So this has actually been kind of a recent discussion about you know, how we identify those areas, and what moving forward, how we want to identify areas that are, you know, necessarily incompatible for bears. But typically what we consider incompatible is where we start to see, especially like cityscapes, really take over certain areas. So obviously, you know, an extremely urban area is not compatible for bears. And we see that more in Rockland County and Westchester County, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of forested landscapes as well, and that you will never see bears. I think we've had a lot of that this year with some of those counties and areas calling in a lot and saying, we're seeing bears, like, what are you gonna do? Come move it. And, you know, our response is, you know, especially in certain times of the year, you will see a lot of, as I stated earlier, like beginning of June, you'll see a lot of young dispersing. So that typically means that they'll find themselves in some odd places. But B, especially in areas kind of like in that Rockland County area by Harriman State Park and Sterling State Forest, there actually is a lot of good bear habitat. So yeah, it's kind of something that, you know, in the future might be a discussion. But overall, incompatible bear habitat is really just extremely urbanized areas.
Interesting. If you're hiking in the woods and you encounter a black bear after you try to make noise, if it doesn't work, are you better off to run or stand your ground?
So if you encounter a bear in the woods, and this is really for any black bear encounter, the first thing you should do is get an idea of whether or not the bear actually noticed you or not. If the bear didn't notice you, so I'm getting away from the question a little bit, but I'll get to that answer in a second. If the bear didn't notice you, your best bet is to stay facing the bear and just slowly back away down the trail about 5-10 minutes, wait it out, and you can walk back up the trail, and more than likely that bear will have moved on. If it did notice you, which is probably a greater likelihood that it did, because bears have incredibly good sense of smell, and they also are very aware of their surroundings, have a very good sense of hearing as well, then your best bet is to make as much noise as you can, put your arms in the air, make your body as big as you can, and make sure that the bear sees you and recognizes you. And then if the bear is kind of reluctant to leave, continue making noise, continue making yourself big, but slowly remove yourself from the situation by backing away from the bear. And always stay facing the bear. You don't want to run, you don't want to, you know, turn your back to it. And it's not necessarily because the bear is gonna, you know, chase somebody down and hunt them down. It's really just because, and I tell this to really everybody that I speak to about this, is you always want to stay facing what could be a potential risk. I mean, and this includes for even other people, you always want to be aware of where that risk is. So you just want to keep an eye on it, make sure that it isn't continuing to follow you, it isn't continuing to approach you. If it does start to approach you, really increase those maneuvers. That's why in the woods, especially in black bear dominated areas, it might not be a bad idea to carry something like an air horn. I wouldn't go as far as carrying something like bear spray, and especially because actually in New York, bear spray is illegal. But you definitely don't need something like that in this area. You know, black bears, again, want nothing to do with people. They want to remove themselves from the situation. They don't want confrontation. So the best idea is, especially if the bear is reluctant to leave or doesn't want to leave, just slowly back yourself away, continue to make noise, yell at it, shout at it, put your arms in the air, make yourself big, and make sure your whole group is doing that. If you're with a group, you know, continue to do that. More than likely, the bear will probably remove itself from the situation, though, if that's the case.
Interesting. We're pretty much winding down on the questions, and I noticed one thing, and we mentioned it before, Newports. I know you spoke about Harriman State Park about a minute ago, and I've spent some time there, and that we have a number of people involved with the museum who went to Newport, so their children went there. I'm just kind of wondering, where in that area would there likely be bears? I'm guessing Mohonk and Minnewaska State Park, where we all go to on weekends.
Yeah, so you know, in Ulster County, you can really find black bears anywhere there's forest. You know, that includes right in the outskirts even of New Paltz as well, especially when you get some of those bigger properties that you kind of get right in the outskirts of New Paltz or in Gardner. But Minnewaska has a ton of bears, and Mohonk Preserve has a ton of bears. So, you know, if I had to bet money on it, if you're hiking around those areas, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a black bear. And don't forget to look for sign too, is another really good indicator of bears in the area. But there are definitely plenty around there, just even the immediate outskirts of New Paltz too.
That's so cool. Yeah, I never saw any bears in the area. I haven't been there in a while, but it was great. Thank you so much. This is really, really great. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to help out with getting an answer. And I am going to send this back to our chairman, Michael Drillinger, to do a wrap up. And Emily, we really appreciate your time. Michael, take it away.
And I too want to thank Emily for an amazing and wonderful talk. We had a great turnout tonight, a lot of interest in the topic. And if you want to relive the moments of tonight's talk, as I said, in about 3 days, it'll be on our YouTube channel. If you want to share this with friends who couldn't be here, I know that our YouTube channel attracts a lot of interest long after the talks are over. So I wouldn't be surprised if this particular program is in gives a run for the money for some of our other very popular programs, because this one was really great. I know I've got my own bear stories, and I'm sure a lot of you have a bear story, and perhaps we'll do a program sometime in the future of just swapping bear stories. But again, I want to say on behalf of the TMR Scout Museum, Emily, thank you very much for a great program, and I hope you'll come back and do something else for us in the future.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. It really means a lot for our department and for the Wildlife Bureau to be able to spread the word and hopefully, you know, help people out. That really is the most important thing, but, you know, help our bear friends out as well. And I'm sure that we'd be able to plan something out, any kind of wildlife species. I'm sure there's plenty of other people, including myself, that would love to do another presentation. So thank you.
That sounds great. It's Mitchell again. And one more quick question that I think people would love to hear the answer. Are there bears around TMR and the Scout Camp itself?
Absolutely. There are 110% bears around TMR. Be on the lookout, be ready to see bears, be prepared for, you know, if you have a bear encounter. It's always a good idea to go in prepared and know how to handle a situation rather than wait for something to happen. So it's always a good idea to be prepared. I think as probably a scout saying as well, to definitely be prepared and know how to interact with the wildlife you may encounter.
Yeah, I will tell you that there was one time in the spring that I had brought my nephew to the Indian Cliffs, and just as we got to the cliffs, a bear went scampering off in the direction of the Katoki cabin. And I know that many scouts who've camped there in the summer have seen the bears hovering around the trash compactors. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
there are lots of bears that show up at TMR.
It's too tempting of a smell, that's for sure. But it's contained, so that's the number one thing.
Yeah. Well, TMR has worked very hard over the years to come up with some system, and right now they have these lockable compactors. So,
Right.
Yeah. Even when I've had a bag of garbage myself, I couldn't figure out how to get it inside the darn thing. So, in any event, those of you who have not visited the museum in the past couple of years, I want to remind you all that you can take a virtual tour, and Scouts can earn the 2020 No COVID TMR Historian patch if they go to tmrmuseum.org/historian, take the virtual tour, and answer a quick set of questions, a quiz. It's a fun thing to do with your whole unit as well. And adults might be interested in purchasing the 6-inch No COVID commemorative back patch that says we are all in this together. While I was talking about the patches, I might as well also mention that a number of families have hiked the TMR Trail this summer and even this fall, even though there are still restrictions on troop camping at 10 Mile River. Family groups can camp, and there have been a number of Scout family groups that have hiked the TMR Trail and that have earned the TMR Historical Trail Award. So if you're interested in knowing more about the TMR Historical Trail Award, or even hiking at TMR, again, there's information at the museum's website, tmrmuseum.org. I am pleased to announce that our next and probably last program of this series will be next Tuesday, October 13th. With great pleasure, the historian Glenn Pontier will talk about Native American life in the area around 10 Mile River. Glenn did a great presentation earlier this summer about logging and rafting on the Delaware, and I'm sure his talk on Native American life will be just as informative and enjoyable as his talk on lumbering and rafting. Again, if you enjoyed this program tonight and you're so moved to help support future programs, please go to tmrmuseum.org/donate. Otherwise, and in addition, again, here are the different ways you can interact with the museum on our social media, our website, our Facebook page, our Twitter account, and on YouTube, where you can not only see this program again, but you can watch all of our previous programs, plus browse a library of many interesting 10 Mile River related videos. And that's the end of our show. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a great evening.